All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. You're watching the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop, and I'm Gary Grotto, your host for today. So for the next hour, we're going to talk about the future of electric vehicles in Arizona. The evolution of EVs is here, and in the coming years, we're going to see more of them on the road and the construction of the infrastructure needed to support them. And speaking of support, I'd first like to thank our sponsors, the Arizona Public Health Association and the Arizona chapter of the National Electric Contractors Association, or NECA. The Public Health Association is a nonprofit professional organization working to improve the health of Arizona communities through advocacy, education, and professional development. NECA is the voice of the $202 billion electrical construction industry that brings power, light, and communication technology to buildings and communities across the United States. So I want to say thank you to both of you for doing this. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Lauren Kuby. Lauren served 2 years on the Tempe City Council and is a former vice mayor. She is a sustainability scientist at Arizona State University and a recognized national champion for climate action and clean energy. And she's also running for a seat on the Arizona Corporation Commission. Good morning, Lauren. And we also have Lauren's husband, Dr. Michael Kuby. Michael is a professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning at Arizona State University, where he's also director of the Interdisciplinary Graduate Certificate in Transportation Systems and a senior sustainability scientist in the Global Futures Laboratory. His research and teaching focus on transportation, energy, and sustainability using spatial analysis, modeling, and survey research. He's written over 80 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals, including over 30 on alternative fuels, vehicles, driver behavior, and station location models. His research has been funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, World Bank, Salt River Project, NASA, Sloan Foundation, and U.S. Global Change Research Program in Arizona. He co-edited the most recent background reports on transportation for the Arizona Town Hall. Thank you for joining us, Michael. And next we have Phoenix City Councilwoman, Yasemin Ansari. Yasemin is the youngest woman elected to the Phoenix City Council and the first Iranian American elected to the public office in the state of Arizona. She's an Arizona native, daughter of immigrants, and let's see here, and graduate of Stanford and Cambridge universities. She's dedicated her career to finding solutions to critical issues such as climate change, air pollution, and public health, most recently as a senior policy advisor at the United Nations. Thank you for joining us. And also joining us is Kirsten Engel. Kirsten served in the Arizona legislature from 2017 to 2021. She's currently running in the hotly contested congressional race in CD6 in Southern Arizona. Kirsten is a professor at the University of Arizona College of Law, where she teaches and researches in the area of environmental and administrative law. She's on leave right now from that, though. So good morning, Kirsten, and welcome to Morning Scoop. And our last panelist is Doug Nick. Doug is the Assistant Communications Director for Public Information at the Arizona Department of Transportation. And in this role, he manages a relations team that handles ADOT projects, the motor vehicle division, safety issues, and other transportation issues. And he's coming to you live from an MVD office. So Doug has been in state service for 20 years and the last 6 with ADOT. Good morning, Doug. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right. So I'd like to start with Doug because we've got some recent news having to do with electric vehicles in Arizona. And can you give us an overview on the electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan? And, yeah, and the federal government's approval of the plan.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you. Yes, when the infrastructure bill was signed into law some time ago, our leadership at ADOT made a commitment immediately because we knew that this was something that was going to be a part of the bill, part of the law. that we would devote resources that we could to put together as good a plan as possible to meet the expectations of the federal law. And so we have ADOT staff that are committed to this, but we also, because it is a large lift, we hired some consultants to do a lot of the work to develop this plan and spent quite a few months putting it together. We had public outreach. We continue to have public outreach, but we had public outreach to ensure that we got stakeholder involvement, not only from members of the general public, but also from other governmental entities, regional, local, and also many in private industry, because everybody needs to come together to make this happen. We submitted the plan as a draft in August, and just last week found out that the plan is approved. We are one of the first states, and among several dozen states, that have had approval of the plan, so we're very pleased to have that. What happens now is that we have received immediately $11.3 million to start the process of actually beginning implementation. And then we'll have next month in October, another $16.3 million coming in. And then this is just a portion of the overall $76.5 million that we will get during the 5-year life of this initial planning process. The next step for us is that we're going to begin solicitation of awards for contracts to upgrade existing electrical vehicle, or just say EV charging stations, as well as look at new locations in designated alternative fuel corridors. That process begins in the spring of this coming year, so probably about 6 months or so. And then that's for the renovation of existing stations. And then about a year from now, we'll be looking at solicitations for new construction. I can go into some more details of the plan if you'd like, or if you'd like me to defer to some others. I can talk for longer, or I can back off and come back to me, whichever you prefer.
Well, one more question. I mean, you talk about the corridors, the alternative corridors. Now they're mostly going to be, they're going to be just on I-10, 40, 17, and some other interstates, right?
Sure. So I can spend a few minutes talking about the corridors. The initial plan has designated all 6 of Arizona's interstate highways as alternative fuel corridors. It's everything from Interstate 8, I-10, 40, 17, 19, and 15. We have a little slice of I-15 in the extreme northwest corner of the state, and that is included as well. And those were chosen simply because about a little more than 20% of the vehicle miles driven in Arizona are driven on interstate highways. Obviously, they're located in areas that reach out to different demographics. They're statewide in scope. So it's kind of the low-hanging fruit. As we proceed in the process, we're going to be looking at other non-interstate corridors, but that's at least a year away. But when we think about non-interstate corridors that may be a part of the plan, we're thinking of US 60, which is not just a freeway in Phoenix, but it goes through much of the state. US 93 in the northwest corner of the state, State Route 69 up near Prescott, the Beeline Highway, SR 77 in southern Arizona. These will all be considered. I'm not saying that that's going to actually happen, but they will certainly be considered. And of course, the standard is that we have stations within a mile of a traffic interchange or an intersection, and they can be no more than 50 miles apart. We were, however, granted 2 exceptions to the 50-mile rule. One is the stretch of I-40 between Seligman, which is west of Williams, and Kingman. And the other is a stretch between Casa Grande and Gila Bend on Interstate 8. Those are respectively about 60, 70 miles distance. So we're not too far out of the 50-mile compliance. And the simple fact is that the infrastructure becomes an issue in both of those places. So that's where we stand right now. The interstate highways are job number 1, and we'll look at others as we move on.
All right, great. Thank you, Doug. So I want to, everyone can bear with me for 1 second here. I want to share the screen. And so, Michael, can you tell us what we're looking at here? And then I've got another question after that. Can you see the screen?
Perhaps if we're not speaking, we should have our mute button on.
Thank you, Lauren. The green dots represent the level 2 and level 3 charging stations in Arizona and Phoenix. So level 1 refers to just 110 charging, like a household outlet. They cost, you know, the cable costs $100 or $200, and it can charge about 4 miles of battery range for every hour that you're plugged in. That's not shown here on these maps. Those are in people's houses. Level 2 is a charger. It's a 220 volt charger, and it can add about 15 to 25 miles of driving for every hour it's plugged in. So that means that you have to put them somewhere where someone's going to be parked for a while and doing some other activity, shopping, going to the movies, going to work, being at home. Level 3 is fast charging. It's direct current fast charging. And this is evolving towards something called ultra fast charging, with the goal to eventually be able to charge up 200 or 300 mile battery in 15 minutes. That's not really feasible yet, but it's coming. So one thing is, as you look at the map on the left, you certainly see areas where we have more public charging stations, and then sort of public charging deserts, like most of South Phoenix, you know, between the I-10 and the South Mountain Freeway. You've really just got the 2 stations on 35th Avenue. Whereas in Scottsdale and Tempe, North Phoenix, you see quite a lot of stations. And then if you look at the map on the right, you already see a number of charging stations on the interstates. Many of these are Tesla charging stations, superchargers that only charge Teslas. You see concentrations in Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff, Prescott, and places like that. You don't see any level 2 chargers at all in the northeast corner of the state where the Navajo reservation is. So that's what we're looking at.
So if I wanted to leave Phoenix and drive to the far reaches of the state, you know, to Lake Havasu, to Window Rock, Nogales in my electric vehicle, I mean, what's that trip going to be like for me? Or if I wanted to drive from Lake Havasu to Window Rock in an electric vehicle, what's that trip going to be like? Michael?
Sure. You know, a lot of the early adopters of EVs are people with multiple vehicles. So a lot of the folks who, you know, will leave their electric vehicle at home, or drive a plug-in hybrid, which can, you know, you can always fill up with gasoline. But if you're driving a pure battery electric vehicle and it has a typical range of 200 to 300 miles, you really need the fast chargers that, you know, where you could stop for maybe 20, 30 minutes and add another couple hundred miles of range, you know, while you're surfing your phone or you're getting a bite to eat. But you know, otherwise you're making detours, you're making long stops. You've got to time it with lunch. If you look like if you're going up to Page, and you're going to need to detour off to Tuba City there, and then drive 10 miles back to the road up to Page. Yeah, it's inconvenient. It takes a lot of planning at this stage.
Okay. And so let's talk about the oops, sorry there. My fan's getting a little out of control. Let's talk a little bit about you know, air quality. I mean, that's why we're going to electric vehicles. And so, you know, Lauren and Yasmin, I know you want to talk about this as well. Yasmin, I'm sorry, want to talk about this as well. Let's talk about air quality. I mean, where are we right now And, how will electric vehicles impact the air quality?
Well, I guess I'll start us off, but we all know that burning fossil fuels is poisoning our air. And Arizona air is amongst the worst air quality in the nation. We have multiple counties in Arizona that have received F grades from the American Lung Association. And it's not just those that are most vulnerable suffer, it is all of us that suffer from poor air quality. And we know it leads to cardiovascular diseases, asthma, pulmonary diseases. So there's a whole range of impacts on human health. And then there's huge impacts on the economy as well. So it's really important that we reduce carbon emissions from cars. And we know that the transportation sector is the most polluting of all the sectors in terms of contributing to carbon pollution. So if we electrify, and it's about electrifying everything, it's like the way we cool our homes, how we can use electric stove tops, because having a gas stove in your house is like living with a smoker, even when you don't turn that gas stove on. So it's about electrifying everything, and electric vehicles are a big part of that mix.
Yasmin?
Yeah, sure. Just to add a little bit. So we do at the City of Phoenix every 2 years a GHG impact study to see both within our own city operations, but also within the public, what is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation continues to be, or has just become actually, the #1 contributor to GHG emissions, both from the public and City of Phoenix operations. What we saw in the most recent results from our 2020 study is that we've seen a big drop in GHG emissions caused by buildings in Phoenix because we've moved to more efficient building methods, a transition towards clean energy on the grid and energy efficiency programs. So that's great. But at the same time, as Phoenix has become the 5th largest, fastest growing city in the country, and our population is increasing, that also means emissions from our vehicles are increasing as more people, of course, today largely still have gas powered vehicles. So back to some of the points that Lauren mentioned regarding, the health impacts, I think that is the most compelling reason why we need to focus and really hone in on the transportation sector. The American Lung Association consistently puts out new data on this, and Phoenix, I'll just speak to Phoenix in particular, we rank 5th nationwide for highest number of unhealthy ozone days. We rank 13th in unhealthy particle pollution days, and then 8th in unhealthy annual levels of particle pollution. We've seen rise in asthma among kids and cancer rates. I mean, and the data shows it, but I also hear it from my residents, families who will say, my 5-year-old has asthma, and this is unusual. And it's clearly the air quality that has that impact. There's also very heavy economic repercussions if we are redesignated as a serious non-attainment zone for ozone control, which could have drastic impacts on our ability and for businesses and industry leaders to set up shop here in the future. So that's why my focus on the Phoenix City Council since day one has been targeting our transportation sector and trying to rapidly accelerate not only public adoption of electric vehicles, but looking at our own fleet, from everything from our light duty vehicles to our buses. I think the air quality argument is one of the most compelling and why we need to act as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Yasmin. Kirsten, let's get you in on this. So we talked a little bit yesterday or the other day about legislation at the state legislature. Electric vehicles haven't been a big thing at the big issue with the Arizona legislature, has it?
There have been attempts, let me say that, but less in terms of action. But I would just like to say also, just to add in here about the benefits of EVs. And we've all seen, the high price of gas lately and how unpredictable that is, and how that has really hit the pocketbooks of so many families. And just think, an EV car takes that completely off the table for families, that they're not facing, $5 at the gas pump. And the other benefit that hasn't been talked about, I mean, the issues of air quality are just absolutely huge. And when you add up the number of days that kids miss in school, or working people miss in terms of heart or other respiratory issues related to air pollution, it is huge. So it's a real economic hit here that we have from air pollution that electric vehicles really help us with. And then the other benefit that I just wanted to make sure that we had out there is, jobs. Arizona is becoming a true hub in terms of EV manufacturing. I think we now rate, is it 7th in the nation, I think, in the number of registered electric vehicles. So that's great. And we now have 6 EV manufacturing facilities, companies that are now operating in Arizona. 2 are in my district that I am running for, Lucid Motors and Nikola. And these are providing jobs, well-paying jobs. And this is going to be a true boon also for our, innovation areas, for new technology, and also working with our colleges. Pima Community College now has one of these, a sort of center for excellence in terms of automotive technology, where their students can take courses in working on electric vehicles. So this is all going to help in terms of training people to take these jobs. So this is going to be just a big, huge boon for Arizona. But back to your question in terms of the Arizona legislature, no, it has been disappointing to see the lack of initiative on behalf of the legislature in terms of jumping on and making sure that EV cars are available and affordable for Arizonans, and that we have the infrastructure available as well. In the legislature, I introduced on several occasions something known as the Clean Cars Bill. There's now 17 states in the United States that have enacted at least a part of this program of laws and regulations. And basically what it does is it really increases the options for consumers in terms of the cars the EV cars that they can purchase. So if you go to, because what it does is it says for car manufacturers that a certain percentage of the cars that they sell within the state must be low emission or electric vehicles. And in a state that has one of these programs, consumers have a wealth of options in terms of EVs that they can purchase. And it's just not the case in states that are not signed up for this. So unfortunately, at one point, I actually got a partial hearing on this bill and was able to talk a lot about its benefit, the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and also U of A professor testified about the benefits of this bill to the state, but unfortunately, we did not get that passed. More recently, one of my colleagues, Senator Victoria Steele, who has represented a district here in Tucson, she had some really great bills, one using really the procurement process. So, the state of Arizona needs to purchase vehicles. Vehicles, get too old, they need to be replaced. And so one would basically place a priority where appropriate that those new vehicles would be electric vehicles. And of course, save the state money in terms of gas and maintenance. And another one of the initiatives was with respect to new home construction, so that we can begin to unravel this issue of charging. So for new homes would be outfitted and it would appropriate money from the legislature so that on a pilot basis, that was her idea. Let's see if this can work. New home construction would have the infrastructure needed to be able to charge an electric vehicle at home. So I think these were great ideas. Unfortunately, the legislature has had less of an appetite for it. But I think what we're seeing is that the market is moving ahead on these issues. It was very exciting to see that there are going to be much lower, less expensive models that will be available that are in line with the cost of gas-powered vehicles, especially by General Motors. I think that's great. And we're also seeing, other folks are, just not waiting for the Arizona legislature. In that Inflation Reduction Act, not only will there be tax credits for things like used EVs, another way of trying to make sure that this is affordable to ordinary families. But also we're seeing that the fleet of Postal Service vehicles will be EVs. And of course, that's been a long-standing issue. And you think about all the pollution that comes from those postal vehicles as they drive around neighborhoods and they stop and they idle. We will be able to get rid of that pollution. And, think of all the post offices there are in even very small communities in the United States. Those will have EV charging station. And my understanding is that will be available also for people to be able to charge their vehicles. So there's a lot going on. I hope there's more going on in the Arizona legislature in the future, but in the meantime, the market, Congress is moving ahead on these issues. And I hope to join them in Congress.
Hey, Gary, could I make a comment
Yes.
as well? Adding on to what Kirsten had to say, I know State Representative Jennifer Germain introduced prescient legislation about increasing or adding stations to the highways. And so we thank her for her work. And what's frustrating to me as a voter is that over 74% of Arizonans want to see this transition to a clean energy economy, yet that's not reflected in the legislature. And it's also important to add about the jobs that are created is that a much higher percentage than your typical job, they're going to be union jobs because the Davis-Bacon Act and federal investment requires that they be highly skilled and have an entryway for people into the middle class. So that's an important economic benefit that will accrue from electrification. But I think it is important to add sort of a cautionary note in that as we electrify, we must electrify. We also need to do this in combination with decarbonizing our grid, decarbonizing our power systems, because electrification is going to add a lot more demand to the system. So we have to look at how we get our power. And should that be from fossil fuels? Because then you're just sort of offsetting where the pollution is occurring, and you're still contributing to carbon emissions, methane emissions, and all the greenhouse gas. So it's important that we decarbonize as well, or else we're just kind of shifting the problem.
All right. Well, Kirsten, you mentioned $5 a gallon gas. I mean, Michael, what does it cost to fully charge your car? I've never, I don't have an electric car, and I don't know if there's any, I imagine if you're doing it in your home, your electric bill might go up, but if you're out on the road and you're using a charging station, how does that work? And you're on mute right now.
It's all, for public charging, it's all just very easy. You tap your card or you swipe your card. So one thing is that most people charge their EVs at home, and they do the vast majority of their charging at home. And so that depends on what time of day you charge and what your rate plan is. It can be extremely inexpensive. If you do you program your charger to charge at night, you get on the, SRPs or APSs or TPs, EV charging plans, which can be as low as almost, 3 or 5 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and you charge your car there. It's much more expensive, but still cheaper than gas to charge publicly. So those who lack home charging possibilities, they don't have a dedicated parking spot, they're apartment renters or condo owners, they're in a real bind. And that's some 45% of the American population. They're going to pay more to charge publicly, and it's going to be very inconvenient for them.
And if I can, just emphasize again, that's where the Arizona legislature could be really helping out in terms of making sure that there is that infrastructure at homes and apartment complexes, and helping homeowners and renters with landlords with the cost of installing that.
So, you know, part of the conversation the other day was about, and forgive me if I use the term wrong, electrification equity. Am I saying that right? So, you know, we've got, I think it's rural, economic, and then multiple housing. And so, Lauren, can you start off, you know,
Sure,
as
thank
far
you.
as, well, first of all, define electrification equity.
That is making electrification revolution available and accessible to us all, so that all taxpayers, all residents can benefit from electrification. And the Arizona Corporation Commission, the fourth branch of government, I'm running for that office, they have an ongoing transportation electrification docket, so they are playing a really strong role. And so they're acquiring, and they voted 3-2 a few months ago to begin this docket, as they call it, with the ACC, but they're requiring investor-owned utilities to devise an EV implementation plan and EV charging infrastructure, and produce a budget and present it to the commission for lots of public engagement. And one of the important points they made was that it has to address low-income areas, rural areas, and multifamily housing, you know, commercial, industrial, but it really has to address the equity issues so that it doesn't become something that's just available to those who are in urban areas and who own homes. I mean, we really have to have this be a broad swath of Arizona residents. And this is the intention of the Inflation Reduction Act too, is to really introduce equity elements into our energy system. And it's really important. I know Mike could also talk about equity and the research that's being done at ASU and other places about how to really integrate equity principles and practices into electrification planning.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the cost of electric vehicles, because that's central to the whole question of equity. And there was a comment in the chat about how expensive EVs are. So an electric vehicle, you know, the most expensive part of it is the battery. And the bigger battery that you need to have more driving range, you know, it really drives up the cost. First of all, the battery costs have been coming down incredibly fast, just like we've seen with flat screen TVs and solar panels and any new technology. They've dropped 80% in the last 10 years. And that's ongoing. That's not going to level out for a while. The car companies early on, especially led by Tesla, figured out that the early adopters were going to be, you know, wealthy, highly educated people. So this more expensive car, because of the battery, they also made them even more expensive by aiming for the wealthy buyers and making it a status symbol. We are now rapidly seeing a explosion of the number of models. We're seeing a lot more small EVs with smaller batteries, two-seaters made by, say, Electric Mechanica in Arizona, designed for just maybe your commuting car, your second car. And the rest of an electric vehicle is a much cheaper vehicle than a gasoline car. So it's not a permanent aspect of electric vehicles that they will always be more expensive. Price parity, even on the purchase of an equivalent vehicle, is going to happen this decade. And we've already reached price parity in terms of lifetime cost of use, cost of fuel, and much lower maintenance because there's far fewer moving parts.
Yeah, and you know, somebody mentioned in the Q&A that the maintenance is almost zero. Is that?
Well, you still have to replace tires and
yeah,
suspensions can go, but yeah, you don't have to change the oil. It's much less wear and tear on the brakes because you're all electric vehicles, from the hybrids to the plug-in hybrids to the battery electrics, have regenerative braking. So it's capturing the braking energy and recharging the battery that way as you drive. So yes, much less maintenance costs.
Now, we talked, go ahead.
Yeah, Gary, I was just going to jump in on the issue of equity. I wanted people to understand that the ADOT plan that we've submitted does address this and will continue to. And I should have mentioned earlier on that this plan is available to anybody that wants to look at it on our website at AZDOT, that's spelled out AZDOT.gov/EV plan. That's AZDOT.gov/EV plan. And the equity issue is addressed starting on page 105 of the plan. Not only is equity something we're looking at in terms of availability, making sure stations are in multiple parts of the state and communities, but also in our public outreach, which is very robust. And part of our public outreach is, which is ongoing, has not ended, will not end, is to ensure that we get word out to communities that of multiple demographics in every corner of the state, tribal, rural, economically disadvantaged areas, wherever, so that people understand what this is all about. So I just wanted to put in a pitch for where people can see the plan, but also that this is a huge part of it.
Great, thank you, Doug.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question to Mr.
Yeah.
Nick? So one question I have is, will these charging stations, are they run by private operators? Who is actually going to be providing the power? And then the other question is, one of the big issues for consumers is making sure that these charging stations work. So many times you come to one and it says it's out of order. How are we going to make sure that doesn't happen for consumers in the state?
Okay, so ADOT is not going to be in the business of providing the power. We're in the business of developing the plan and working with industry stakeholders. We had conversations with about 40 industry stakeholders so far, and those are ongoing. The plan, I don't have the page number in front of me, but the plan does address this. When we do our solicitations, we're going to have identifying things such as locations, current owners, upgrade needs, and the people that get awards for upgrading current stations are going to have to demonstrate a record of providing reliable and safe EV charging services that meet or exceed industry standards. They've got to show they've got a community engagement plan. They've got the money to do this. They are obviously businesses in good standing. They've got the technical expertise. And it's going to be much the same when we talk about the new construction of stations as we go out there, that they do have experience in installation, operation, ownership. So just like we would procure any contractor, vendor, business, whatever, for any state business, we want to make sure that they meet all the expectations or exceed them and meet the public's needs. That's extremely important, and it is codified in the plan. The only exception that might involve public aid entities having a charging station is if you say have a station at a national park or someplace like that, where it's a public entity, of course, or it's a vendor there. That's a possibility. But that is a concern for us that, yes, of course, we need reliable, safe, industry standard, at least, stations. And that's what our plan intends to propose.
And it needs to be as cheap as possible too. I have concerns about that because I tend to charge my car, just at night in my home, because when I do use the charging stations, it doesn't make economic sense. And so with this federal investment, I'm hoping that we'll see these charging stations be as free as possible, because they're really aimed at people that don't have other options. They don't necessarily live in a home where they can plug in overnight.
All right, so Lauren and Yasmin, we talked a little bit about this the other day, about what your respective cities have done with EVs and what you're what you've done and what you're planning to do. Can both of you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I had the privilege of chairing the mayor's ad hoc committee on electric vehicles starting right after I was elected last year. And essentially we had a pretty robust process, 14 members of this committee made up of experts in the field, from auto manufacturers to utilities, energy efficiency experts from SWEEP, local organizations, and all the rest. And the goal of the whole, endeavor was to develop a roadmap for the city of Phoenix to essentially help make EVs more affordable and accessible, and try to be in line with the federal goal of having 280,000 electric vehicles on Phoenix roads by 2030. So we went through a long process. We actually, speaking of equity, that was a big focus of ours throughout this endeavor. We had a dedicated subcommittee within the group focused on equity education and outreach, and really focusing on what we need to do to make sure that, again, the affordability and accessibility piece are prioritized. So I'll, I would say it's, I was very pleased that in June, when we passed the plan, which was ultimately called the Transportation Electrification Action Plan, we had unanimous bipartisan support. All 3 Republicans on the Phoenix City Council also voted for it, and were very supportive of the transition to clean energy and electric vehicles. So that was very encouraging to see. But I'll highlight some of the goals that I think speak to many of the things that we've been talking about. So the 3 broad goal areas of the plan are around equity, accelerating public adoption, and leading by example. So looking at our own city fleet. We have a goal of installing 500 public charging stations by 2030. We are currently at over 100. But what that means is looking at all of our city properties, whether that's parks, libraries, the airport, anywhere that we manage, we want to make sure we have public charging available. So back to the equity piece, I think one of the things that we did early on last year, even while we were developing the roadmap, was installing charging stations at places like Desert West Community Center in Maryvale, at Cesar Chavez Park in Levine, places that don't have the big malls like Kierland and Scottsdale Quarter, in more affluent areas that have charging available. So we are doing our part from the public side to make sure that's accessible, and we'll continue to do so. We also, back to the conversation we were speaking, regarding the legislature about making it easier, and supporting multifamily developments and having EV charging and new homes and all the rest. So we also have goals in our plan that I'm really excited about pushing forward this year, about streamlining permitting processes and developing EV ready building codes, and also drafting stipulation language that will make sure, because I think that is the most important piece, is making sure that any new development is future proofed to be able to accommodate EV charging. And it's been great. So I would say some of the biggest success stories of this process that we've gone through is just all of the public outreach that we did. We did more than 40 public outreach meetings to get input on the plan before it was passed. And through that, there's, the Arizona Multi-Housing Association and developers who obviously need to play a big role in this. And we have had several roundtables where we've brought those folks in. But then instead of us trying to, be the middleman and make the case around why EV charging should be prioritized now, maybe when the demand isn't fully there, we brought in the auto manufacturers like GM and Ford, and those who have made massive commitments and said, we are moving away from fossil fuels by 2030 or 2035. We won't even be making gas-powered vehicles. We brought them directly with the developers to have that conversation. And I will tell you, it's made a big difference. There's already proposals coming forward in my district from the same developers with big charging components, because they understand that demand now and where the market is going naturally, even without, AZ legislature support, for example. But anyway, so then a couple of the other pieces around equity. So the federal government has this framework, it's called Justice 40, which means that 40% of investments in electrification will go into historically underserved communities. So we decided to adopt that same framework within our EV roadmap. So we now have a dedicated staff member focused on equity. Last year through our budget, we were able to make our EV program manager a full-time position. And we actually have a steering committee within our city staff and departments that is working through making sure that every piece of this plan is implemented in a timely manner. So really, really excited about it. There's a lot of great stuff in there. And I think momentum is growing so quickly, and cities can play such an important role in the absence of leadership at other levels of government.
Now, are there any planning and zoning mandates that you have to have a certain percentage of, or a certain amount of charging stations in a new multi-housing development, a percentage of the number of residents or anything like that. Have we gotten there yet, or
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not mandates yet. Right
Yeah.
now, we are working on developing proposals for EV ready building codes and zoning ordinances that would help support EV ready updates. We do intend to do, robust stakeholder engagement to make sure that anything we do doesn't have unintended consequences. But I think eventually that could be something we look at. But at this point in time, we're trying to look at our building codes and zoning ordinances and see what updates we can make. And again, because our zoning processes are so, anytime someone needs to come to the city of Phoenix for a zoning change, there are negotiations that happen. And I think already I'm seeing such a shift over the past year in developers coming forward and automatically including EV charging as something that they want to do because they see that it's a priority for the city council and they see that residents are asking for it. Many, residents, when they're considering new apartment buildings, they're asking if there's charging infrastructure available, and that's something that they look to. So I think it's kind of happening organically, which is phenomenal, but we will do our part to make sure we can streamline the process and make it easier and also help, accelerate it to the extent that we can.
Lauren.
Hey, classic moment with the dark barking dog. Yeah,
Okay.
Tempe is moving ahead. I was sorry to see it not completed by the time I left, but working on amending the building codes to make sure that new buildings are EV ready. And there's been some resistance by the multifamily housing association, frankly. But it's really important to note that retrofitting is far more expensive than making a building EV ready. The same thing with making a home ready. So knowing this transition is happening, we want to ease the transition, but we need to start somewhere, and that's with EV building codes. Tempe has been leading the way in EV adoption. I believe we have 22 EVs in our fleet. It's, I think, the largest percentage. Tucson may be eclipsing Tempe, but I think it's the largest percentage of any jurisdiction in Arizona except for Pima County. So it's important to note that the charging stations we put in, I have a really dramatic figure here, but it prevented 46,000 kilograms in total GHG emissions from the inception of the program. And that's equivalent to planting 1,200 trees growing for 10 years. So that gives you sort of a visceral sense of what electrification can mean in terms of also, decarbonizing. It's important to note that, city of Tucson has adopted a lot of building codes. Are really moving forward. I think Phoenix, Tucson, and Tempe have been leaders in this space. And I believe so much that cities are incubators of innovation, and they were prescient in looking at the electrification movement and in anticipation of federal funding and historic federal investment, that they're ready on the ground to invest in and pick up those grant applications when they can and apply. And it's important to note there's great regional cooperation. You look at the Maricopa Association of Governments, Maricopa County Air Quality, of course, AZDOT, the Sustainable Cities Network, where I work at the Global Futures Laboratory. There's a lot of collaboration going on around different tools. For instance, the Maricopa County Air Quality folks have invented an interactive data tool, and this is really helpful when applying for federal funding and grants. It's going to help with regional collaborations. So there's a lot of work being done to make projects shovel ready in anticipation of the great investment that will be happening, that is happening in our state. And I think of any state in the country, it's said that Arizona stands to benefit from this historic federal investment. So I'm excited about that. And when you talk about cities and counties and how they're moving forward, maybe our legislature isn't, but we have cities and counties moving forward. It's also important to note ASU. ASU actually has more electric vehicles in the city of Tempe at 25, and they're purchasing 25 more. So they will be the leader in the state of any entity, any public entity. And they also have a rule in place that they will only purchase electric vehicles from now on out. So that's an important commitment that cities can make. And I know cities across Arizona are developing EV roadmaps. And I just want to salute Councilwoman Ansari and Mayor Gallego, because they really have shown the way for other cities and how to draft these roadmaps and work with industry and work with the stakeholders, even those that are opposed to moving forward, but to work together, because we're all in this together, folks. So we need to really develop comprehensive systems at, universities, cities, counties, and the state.
All right. Thank you. And I'm going to read this question that Scott put in, and I think you referred to it part of the question earlier, but I'll take it from where he says, the electrification will strain our current grid, and let's not forget that PVNGS is supplemented by gas-fired turbines. There needs to be much more emphasis on building our electrical infrastructure. It seems that emphasizing EVs is putting the cart before the horse. Anyone care to comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll jump in on this. I mean, Scott is partly right. An explosive growth of electric vehicles, we expect to get to, maybe half of the vehicle fleet being, or at least new car sales by 2030 being electric. It is going to put more strain on the grid, and, our utilities, SRP and APS, are doing a great job anticipating that, getting in front of it. There's a phenomenon called peak on peak, which is that, when most people charge their EVs is when they come home from work. And so if they charge and plug in right then, that adds to that late afternoon peak when it's hot, the sun's going down, so there's less solar, and everybody's cranking up the AC on their houses. And plus in the morning, the workplace charging could peak. And then ultra fast charging places the biggest strain on the grid. It's very small right now, or fast charging, but is likely to be mostly during the daytime hours. So, you don't want to minimize this, but there's plenty of work being done and solutions. The investment needed is estimated around, maybe $1,500 to $3,000 per EV that our utilities across the country, across the world, are going to have to invest, not so much in new generation, but especially in the distribution system, where thermal overload, feeder upgrades, all these kinds of things are going to be needed. But there's plenty of solutions. In fact, in some ways, electric vehicles will help the grid, because they'll be able to, in the future, be able to be used to store renewable energy at times of day when we're not using very much, and release it later on. There's some possibilities that charging stations could store energy during times when renewable energy is available, using second life batteries from discarded EVs. There's rate structures that incentivize people. There's, the charge, I already have my charger set to not charge until 8 p.m. So I can plug it in my garage, but it won't start charging till after 8. So there's many solutions. It's not that daunting of a problem, but it is something that needs to be planned for and invested in.
If I could chime in just for a second, Michael has well answered the question directly, which I won't elaborate on, but I will say that as part of our public outreach process, we've heard this over and over. It's probably, if not the top, and certainly near the top of the public concerns that have been raised about this: grid capacity, the peak demand. There are also issues about cybersecurity at stations, vandalism issues, things that are always going to be a problem in some ways. I wanted to say that as if you do go to our website and you do go to the webpage that has this plan, there's also a link to how you can comment or give you notification of upcoming outreach efforts that we are undertaking to hear more comments about this and any other issue regarding the plan. And I thought I'd very quickly, because I know time is becoming an issue, on our plan looks at penetration of electric vehicles under several scenarios: low, medium, and high. And we look at an estimate of by 2030, with low adoption, we'd have about 308,000 EVs in the state. Under high adoption, it'd be close to 700,000. So you split the difference, maybe 400,000 by 2030. By 2040, that number goes up to medium adoption, about 1.1 million EVs registered in the state, which is about 23% of the market under that estimate by 2040. For context right now, for what it's worth, just a number, right now we have 7.5 million vehicles registered total in Arizona. Of those, just under 60,000 are EVs.
And let me just add one quick thing to that. With the number of countries and states that have announced bans on gasoline car new sales, starting as early as 2025, or as late as maybe 2040, but most in the 2030 to 35 range, including 15 states and California, which was, if it was a country, would be, you know, one of the top 10 car markets in the world. This is inevitable. It is happening. There's no turning back, and the car companies know it, and we have to prepare for it and have to make it possible for our lower income residents to be able to do this conveniently. Our rural residents, rural drivers drive 50% more miles. They have bigger cars. They have generally somewhat lower incomes. It's a real challenge for them too.
So maybe you can answer this, Michael. Which states or cities are on the forefront of EVs, and you know, how did they get there? How have they done that?
Well, the West is the best. You know, most of the top states, except for maybe New York and New Jersey, are on the Pacific Coast, plus Arizona, Colorado. There are a lot of really great policies out there that different states are doing, or different cities are doing. One cool equity solution is to put a cap on both the income and the MSRP of the car for qualifying for a tax credit. Another thing is, instead of a tax credit, be able to put that rebate on at the point of purchase, right at the dealership. And then when you get to low income people, they don't necessarily shop for cars at dealerships. So make it available at you know, for other kinds of car purchases. You know, as electric cars take over, the whole country is going to have to move away from a gasoline-based tax for road construction and maintenance and go to a vehicle miles tax. Right now, states like California and Washington, Colorado and Washington have an EV registration fee that they charge. Sometimes this fee goes to roads, but it can go to building stations. And then as the EV starts to really detract from the gas tax revenues, it can start to shift over towards, you know, like in Arizona would be the highway user, the HERF. So those are some pretty cool policies. One more I could add on the land use side is when parking lots get rebuilt, require charging being put in any of those building permits.
All right. Well, it's coming, and you know, we're at the end of our hour, and I just want to thank first of all, our sponsors, the Arizona Public Health Association and the Arizona chapter of the National Electrical Contractors Association, and thank all our panelists: Doug Nick, Kirsten Engel, Michael Kuby, Yasmin Ansari, and Lauren Kuby. We really appreciate it, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Thank you.